You ever think a simple family heirloom could spark secrets you never expected? Imagine this: everyone assumes the family ring will go to the person who loudly claimed it, the one everyone's been watching and listening to, the one who's always so sure of themselves. But then a small, unexpected message shows up, just a voice note from Grandmand. Suddenly, everything flips. What she said changes the whole story, and now you're left questioning who really deserves it, who knew what all along, and how a single decision can shift everything in the blink of an eye. Stick around, because what happens next is something no one saw coming, and it will make you rethink assumptions about family, loyalty, and secrets. The story began in the quiet suburban town where Marissa had spent most of her life. The streets were familiar, lined with oaks and maples, each house holding memories that felt like their own kind of family archive. Marissa's family had always been close in a way that seemed effortless on the surface. But, as she had learned over the years, even the closest families had their undercurrents. Her grandmother, Evelyn, was the matriarch, the kind of woman who carried decades of wisdom in her calm gaze, her voice steady but warm, and an intuitive sense for knowing the right moment to act. Everyone in the family respected her, not just because of her age, but because of the way she held the threads of their lives together, silently guiding them with a firm but gentle hand. And at the center of this subtle power was the family ring, a gold band that had been passed down for generations, worn by great-grandmothers, aunts, and occasionally, cousins. It wasn't ostentatious. It was a symbol, something that carried weight far beyond its metal and gemstones. Marissa remembered the first time she saw the ring up close. She had been about 10, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug while her grandmother held the ring between her fingers. "This isn't just jewelry," Evelyn had said, her voice quiet but deliberate. "It carries our stories. Every scratch, every dent, every polish, it remembers the women who came before us. One day, it will choose who it belongs to next, and that decision is never hurried." Even then, Marissa felt a thrill at the idea that something so small could carry such significance, a connection across generations that she could hold in her hand. Yet, as she grew older, she also began to see how the ring had become a quiet source of tension. Family gatherings carried an unspoken undercurrent. Who would inherit it? Who deserved it? Who might fight for it? It was never discussed directly, but the glances, the subtle positioning at holiday dinners, and the occasional remarks made it clear that the ring was more than a keepsake. It was a statement of trust, legacy, and favor. Marissa's Aunt Claire was the kind of person who seemed to believe the world owed her everything, and she had long set her sights on the family ring. Claire was meticulous in her appearance, always projecting confidence, and had a way of speaking that made it sound like every decision, every claim, was obvious to everyone else. Over the years, Claire had made small comments, playful but pointed, about how the ring would naturally come to her. At first, no one took it seriously, was just Aunt Claire being Claire, but as Marissa got older, she began to notice how those comments were layered with expectation. She had a knack for subtly influencing family opinion, turning casual remarks into something that felt inevitable if left unchallenged. And yet, despite her assertiveness, Marissa knew that Claire's bravado often masked insecurity. There was an edge to her confidence, a fear that if she didn't control the narrative, someone else might step in and claim what she believed was rightfully hers. Marissa herself had a quieter relationship with the ring, one rooted more in observation and respect than assertion. She had learned from an early age that family politics were delicate. She wasn't naive. She knew ambition could cloud judgment, but she preferred patience, listening carefully, and acting only when necessary. While Claire made her intentions clear to everyone, Marissa focused on understanding the family's history, the personalities involved, and the nuances that dictated decisions beyond the obvious. She kept her admiration for the ring private, a personal connection rather than a public claim. It wasn't a lack of desire, but a different approach. Respect, not force, would guide her. Marissa knew that moments like this required timing, subtlety, and careful alignment with those who truly held influence within the family, chief among them, of course, her grandmother. The tension escalated during one summer visit to grandmother's house. The family had gathered for what was supposed to be a casual reunion, barbecues, games in the yard, and the familiar rhythm of shared stories. But underneath the surface, Marissa could feel the undercurrents of anticipation. Aunt Claire moved deliberately around the living room, positioning herself near Evelyn, smiling and laughing with exaggerated warmth. making little remarks that reminded everyone, subtly but clearly, of her supposed entitlement. "I've always felt this ring belonged with someone practical," Claire said aloud one afternoon, as if thinking out loud while passing the living room. The comment landed like a stone in the waterwaves of implication, spreading to everyone who heard. Marissa noticed her cousins exchanging quiet looks, their expressions revealing amusement, disbelief, or apprehension, depending on their temperament. Everyone knew what Claire was doing, claiming psychological territory before any official decision was made. It was subtle, almost imperceptible if you weren't paying attention, but the stakes were clear. Evelyn, meanwhile, appeared calm. Her composure was almost supernatural, as if she could sense every thought, every undercurrent, every subtle move before it fully formed. But Marissa knew better than to assume that calm meant inaction. In her quiet moments, Evelyn would retreat to the small study in the corner, leaving the family to their assumptions and their performance. Marissa often wondered what was happening behind those closed doors, what conversations were unfolding, what careful observations were being recorded in that quiet mind that had seen decades of family dynamics unfold with surgical precision. It was here that the power of the grandmother manifested not through forceful assertions, but through patience, timing, and insight. And Marissa had the sense that whatever decision was coming, it would not be rushed, it would not be obvious, and it would be remembered for more than just the possession of a ring. That evening, Marissa found herself alone with Evelyn for a brief moment in the sunroom, the air warm and slightly scented with jasmine from the garden outside. They sat across from each other at the small oak table, sunlight filtering through the windows in slanted golden beams. Evelyn spoke softly, almost in passing, but the weight of her words carried unmistakable significance. "Marissa, remember that what matters is integrity, not what people assume or demand. Watch and listen, always. The story is rarely what it seems." It was not instruction, but a kind of mentoring in subtlety. Marissa felt the gravity of the moment, the unspoken lesson that would shape her actions in the days to come. It was a quiet reassurance, a subtle nod that she was trusted to observe, understand, and act with discernment. That evening, as laughter and chatter echoed through the house, Marissa felt a shift in awareness, a heightened sense of the game that was unfolding around the ring, a realization that she was now very much a player in a silent, high-stakes drama. The days that followed were a careful balancing act. Claire continued to assert her presumed entitlement, often in front of other family members, planting comments like seeds, waiting for reaction, watching for validation. Marissa, meanwhile, maintained her measured approach, attentive, patient, and ready. She observed every exchange, every smile, every hesitation, cataloging reactions in her mind. Her own cousins, some of whom were closer in age, became unwitting witnesses and allies, each offering small insights, each reaction contributing to a broader understanding of the family dynamics. Marissa began to notice patterns, subtle cues from Evelyn, micro-expressions from Claire, and the ways in which peripheral family members reacted. It was a game of observation as much as participation, and Marissa was keenly aware that her strategy would need to be flawless if she was to navigate the tension successfully. Then came the moment that would change everything: a brief but fateful voice note from Evelyn, received on Marissa's phone. It was simple, almost casual in delivery, but the content was deliberate, unmistakable, and entirely unexpected. Evelyn's voice carried the warmth and authority she always did, yet the words themselves subtly disrupted the assumptions that had guided everyone's expectations. It was a quiet act, a private message intended for Marissa that would redefine the perceived rules of the game. Marissa listened to it repeatedly, the meaning sinking in gradually, a mixture of relief, anticipation, and quiet satisfaction building inside her. She realized, at that moment, that all the outward posturing and claims by Aunt Claire were irrelevant. The outcome had already been quietly decided, and the control rested in a place far more thoughtful and deliberate than anyone could see. The voice note, unassuming yet powerful, shifted the entire dynamic, a silent intervention that made her realize the weight of patience, observation, and timing in shaping the unfolding story. From that point forward, Marissa approached the rest of the visit with a heightened awareness, a mixture of curiosity and calm confidence. She observed Claire's movements, the subtle shifts in tone when she spoke, the way other family members began to sense an invisible shift in balance, even if they couldn't articulate it. Every dinner, every casual conversation in the living room, and every interaction with extended family now carried a dual layer of meaning: what was being said aloud, and what was implied, known only to those paying careful attention. Marissa felt the thrill of understanding the unseen currents, of being trusted with insight that no one else held. The story of the family ring was no longer simply a question of entitlement or loud claims. It had become a lesson in perception, patience, and the quiet power of strategic positioning. And for Marissa, the anticipation of what was to come was now underscored by a deep appreciation for the subtle hand of her grandmother, whose wisdom ensured that the right choice would be honored, regardless of appearances. The tension in the household only intensified as the week progressed. Every interaction now seemed layered with unspoken intent, every word a potential strategy in the silent games surrounding the family ring. Aunt Claire's confidence, once so unshakable, began to show subtle cracks. Marissa noticed the way Claire's eyes darted just a fraction too quickly when Evelyn walked into the room. The slight stiffening of her posture when conversation turned toward family history or heirlooms. Claire still performed her role flawlessly, to the untrained eye, smiling, laughing, interjecting commentary, but for those paying attention, it was clear that something unseen had unsettled her. And Marissa, who had been silently watching and absorbing every nuance, felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the voice note had already shifted the balance in her favor, even if the outcome remained hidden from everyone else. The conflicts were not always overt. Most of the tension played out in subtleties. At the dinner table, Claire would lean slightly toward Evelyn, her hand brushing the tablecloth just so, a gesture meant to signal dominance or control over the narrative. Cousins whispered under their breath, eyes flicking between the two women, sensing an invisible competition. Marissa, seated across the table, allowed herself to smile slightly, keeping her movements natural, her body language open but attentive. She had learned early on that subtlety mattered more than confrontation. Each moment became an exercise in careful observation, measuring intent and reaction. Even minor comments like Claire mentioning her own practical sense or the responsibility she could bring to the ring were met with nothing but acknowledgement and slight nods from Marissa, who never revealed that she already held the knowledge that mattered most. As the days went on, the pressure mounted toward a climax that seemed inevitable yet still unpredictable. Evelyn remained quiet in public, her calm presence a constant anchor. But the private knowledge she had imparted to Marissa through the voice note created a tension that hung over the entire household. Claire could feel it, even if she couldn't define it. She became more aggressive in subtle ways, testing boundaries, seeing if any reaction could sway perception. She would stand a little closer when addressing Marissa, sometimes speaking louder, interjecting in conversations, trying to assert dominance, trying to force the narrative that she was the rightful heir to the ring. But Marissa maintained her composure, responding with natural politeness, never overreacting, her confidence growing quietly because she understood the invisible hand of authority, the one Claire could not challenge. The pivotal moment arrived unexpectedly one afternoon. Evelyn had called the family together in the living room, ostensibly for a casual discussion about plans for the coming months. The room was filled with the hum of conversation and laughter, yet under the surface, the energy was taut, as if everyone instinctively sensed the approaching moment of revelation. Claire positioned herself at Evelyn's side, smiling, projecting certainty, the embodiment of expectation. Other family members sat quietly, some with curiosity, some with apprehension, while Marissa took her usual spot slightly off to the side, calm, observing, ready. The tension was almost tangible, like a held breath before an unseen exhale, everyone anticipating some subtle cue that would signal a shift, yet unsure of what form it would take. Then, Evelyn spoke. Her voice was soft at first, as it often was, carrying a tone that demanded attention without requiring force. She began recounting stories of family history, her words threading through generations, each anecdote highlighting traits of integrity, kindness, and judgment. Marissa listened intently, noting the deliberate pauses, the subtle emphasis on certain family members' qualities, and the quiet acknowledgement of actions taken by those who had shown responsibility over time. Claire's smile, so practiced, faltered slightly, as the attention seemed to gravitate more naturally toward Marissa. Evelyn's narrative wove seamlessly into the subtle guidance she had already given through the voice note, creating a momentum that neither Claire nor anyone else could control. Finally, the moment came. Evelyn's gaze met Marissa's directly, calm but resolute, and she spoke clearly, with a tone that carried weight yet remained warm. Marissa, she said, you've listened, you've watched. You've understood not only the past but the intention behind it. I believe the family ring will be best honored in your hands. The words fell into the room like a gentle cascade, and for a fraction of a second, silence enveloped everyone. Claire's expression shifted from confidence to disbelief, a flicker of frustration and shock passing across her face. Cousins murmured, the weight of the declaration settling over the group. Marissa felt a quiet surge of emotion, not triumph, not malice, but a deep recognition of responsibility and trust. The significance of the moment was overwhelming, yet she maintained her composure, aware that her reaction was as much a part of the narrative as the words themselves. Claire's response was immediate yet constrained by etiquette. She forced a smile, a nod, a careful adjustment of posture, but the undercurrent of frustration was undeniable. She attempted to redirect attention subtly, bringing up other family matters, shifting conversations, trying to regain her perceived authority. Yet each effort felt slightly hollow against the gravity of Evelyn's declaration. The room's attention, naturally drawn to Marissa, underscored the quiet power of patience and understanding. Marissa realized that true influence in these family dynamics wasn't about loud claims or overt confidence, it was about the combination of respect, timing, and insight. She had understood the lessons Evelyn had quietly taught, and now the result manifested in a way that neither Claire nor anyone else could dispute. Even after the formal acknowledgement, the tension lingered. Family members whispered among themselves, some expressing support quietly, others offering polite congratulations, all while Claire's attempts to reclaim dominance remained restrained by the subtle authority of Evelyn's choice. Marissa felt the weight of the responsibility settle comfortably on her shoulders. She wasn't focused on resentment or rivalry. Instead, she understood that this was a moment of stewardship, a task to carry the legacy of generations forward with integrity and grace. The conflict that had built over weeks, the subtle undercurrents of competition, the quiet maneuvering of family politics, converged into this single moment of recognition, a climax that balanced anticipation with revelation, strategy with genuine emotion. In the days that followed, the dynamics of the household shifted subtly but unmistakably. Claire, while still present and vocal in her usual ways, had a new layer of caution in her actions. She seemed to measure her words, pause before asserting opinions, aware that her previous tactics could not override the combination of Evelyn's wisdom and Marissa's poised reception of it. Marissa, meanwhile, maintained a balance of humility and quiet confidence, aware that her actions now carried a level of expectation from her grandmother and the family at large. Every interaction became a test of grace and awareness. She had not just inherited a symbol, but a responsibility to manage perceptions, relationships, and legacy with subtlety and care. It was in this period that Marissa truly began to understand the depth of the lesson embedded in the voice note. It wasn't simply about possession of a ring. It was about insight, patience, judgment, and the ability to navigate complex relationships without losing composure or moral grounding. Claire's earlier bravado, the subtle power plays, the social maneuvering, it all had been visible, but inconsequential in the light of informed understanding. Marissa reflected on how often life presented opportunities in which patience and observation mattered far more than loud assertion. The climax had not arrived through confrontation or spectacle. It had arrived through strategic perception, careful attention, and the guidance of someone who understood the family's history and values better than anyone else. Finally, the household settled into a new rhythm, one marked by quiet acknowledgement rather than overt confrontation. Marissa's position was understood and respected, and the undercurrents of tension transformed into subtle appreciation for the process and the outcome. The lessons learned both in observation and in silent strategy would stay with her for a lifetime. The voice note, the seemingly small message from Evelyn, had been the catalyst, the subtle nudge that had ensured the rightful legacy would be honored without conflict, overt display, or resentment. The conflict had reached its apex and resolved not through confrontation, but through clarity, insight, and the subtle assertion of rightful understanding. The days following Evelyn's declaration brought a mixture of relief, reflection, and subtle recalibration for Marissa. While the immediate conflict surrounding the family ring had been resolved in her favor, she understood that the true work, the careful management of relationships, expectations, and perceptions, was only beginning. Claire, though outwardly composed, remained a source of quiet tension. Marissa realized that any overt action against her aunt would not only risk family discord but also diminish the grace and dignity with which she had been entrusted. Instead, she decided to take a different approach, one rooted in subtle influence, patience, and strategic demonstration of capability. It was not about revenge in the classic sense. It was about ensuring that respect and recognition aligned naturally with merit and character, letting actions speak louder than words. Marissa began by engaging more actively in family discussions and decision-making, using her newfound position as a platform to contribute meaningfully, rather than assert dominance. She attended every gathering with a calm, attentive presence, listening carefully, responding thoughtfully, and allowing her consistency to speak volumes. Claire, observing these actions, grew increasingly frustrated not because Marissa was confrontational, but because her quiet competence made Claire's prior attempts at manipulation appear petty and ineffective. The subtlety of Marissa's approach became her strongest asset. She did not need to speak about the voice note or the instructions left by Evelyn. Everyone present could sense the foundation of trust and understanding that had been quietly laid, and it gradually reshaped the family's perception without a single overt confrontation. To further solidify her position, Marissa took small yet deliberate steps to honor the family's history and traditions. She began documenting stories from older relatives, organizing heirlooms, and taking the time to learn nuances of family customs that had previously been overlooked. These acts were simple but highly visible to those who mattered, and they created an undeniable contrast between her thoughtful engagement and Claire's increasingly performative attempts at influence. Marissa's consistent, respectful actions made her role as the custodian of the family ring feel natural and earned, and slowly, the narrative shifted from competition to acknowledgement. Even Claire's closest allies could not dispute Marissa's integrity, patience, and dedication, though some still held back subtle envy that manifested in quiet, pointed comments that failed to disrupt the growing respect for Marissa. One afternoon, Marissa organized a small family gathering to share insights about the family's past and introduce a collection of heirloom items that had been passed down through generations. She spoke with clarity and warmth, inviting input from everyone, including Claire, who was forced to navigate her own mixed feelings. Marissa's handling of the situation demonstrated not just knowledge but an understanding of dynamics, showing that leadership within the family could be exercised without alienation or force. Claire's attempts to interrupt or redirect conversations were politely managed by Marissa's strategic listening and carefully timed responses. Each interaction subtly reinforced Marissa's position and the wisdom of Evelyn's choice, showing the family that the ring and what it represented was in capable and thoughtful hands. As the weeks unfolded, the subtle tension between Marissa and Claire became more nuanced. Claire would occasionally attempt to assert influence or question decisions, but Marissa's calm, consistent responses, coupled with a quiet display of competency, gradually reduced the impact of these attempts. Marissa recognized that the essence of her revenge plan was not to humiliate or confront, but to demonstrate, through everyday actions, that true leadership, trust, and respect were earned, not demanded. The family began to see the contrast more clearly. Claire's focus on self-promotion and immediate gratification versus Marissa's long-term investment in family cohesion and legacy. It was a lesson in patience, strategic observation, and the understated power of consistent, thoughtful action. Marissa also began to engage in subtle mentorship with younger family members, sharing stories, wisdom, and guidance in a manner that felt natural and conversational. This built a network of support that further reinforced her position without needing to resort to overt conflict. Claire's occasional objections or attempts to influence decisions were met with grace, deflection, or gentle redirection, highlighting the difference between reactive aggression and composed foresight. Marissa's presence became a stabilizing force in the household, demonstrating that true authority and influence emerge not from confrontation but from competence, consistency, and respect for relationships. The resolution came gradually, like the unfolding of a quiet tide rather than a sudden storm. Claire's attempts to assert dominance waned, her previously confident demeanor replaced with a measured caution as she realized that her prior strategies were ineffective against the subtle, steady approach of Marissa. The family, witnessing this, began to align their trust naturally with Marissa, not because of overt assertions or confrontation, but because of demonstrated understanding, reliability, and care. Even the cousins who had once whispered in uncertainty now recognized Marissa's role, approaching her with a mixture of respect and appreciation for the way she managed the legacy entrusted to her. It was a transformation that felt earned and natural, a resolution that emphasized competence, patience, and strategic grace over overt rivalry or dramatics. In reflecting on the entire process, Marissa realized that the lessons extended far beyond the family ring. Life presented countless moments where individuals might attempt to claim authority, recognition, or credit that they had not earned. The voice note from Evelyn had been a catalyst, but the true work involved understanding relationships, observing dynamics, exercising patience, and demonstrating consistent, meaningful action. Marissa's reflection extended to her own growth, recognizing that personal integrity, subtle strategy, and thoughtful engagement often carried more weight than immediate confrontation or visible displays of superiority. The experience reshaped her understanding of influence, power, and legacy, illustrating that true leadership was quiet, consistent, and rooted in respect rather than aggression. Ultimately, the story concluded not with drama or confrontation, but with a quiet affirmation of trust, capability, and understanding. Marissa's careful navigation of complex family dynamics allowed her to fulfill the responsibility placed upon her, honoring both the family history and the guidance of Evelyn's wisdom. Claire's diminished attempts at influence highlighted the effectiveness of strategic patience and subtle demonstration of competence. The household, now operating under a renewed rhythm of respect and acknowledgement, reflected the subtle but powerful shift in authority and trust. Marissa's experience served as a reminder that the most profound victories often occur not through dramatic confrontation, but through the consistent, thoughtful application of insight, patience, and deliberate action. Every interaction, every response, every quiet gesture became part of a larger tapestry of influence, legacy, and measured resolution. Marissa looked back on the experience and felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from triumph over Claire, but from knowing that she had navigated the situation with integrity, grace, and insight. The family ring, once a symbol of potential conflict, now represented continuity, understanding, and careful stewardship. The lessons she had learned extended beyond family boundaries, shaping her approach to relationships, leadership, and personal growth in ways that would inform her decisions for years to come. She understood that true influence and respect were not granted through force or assertion, but earned through deliberate, thoughtful action, consistency, and a quiet commitment to doing what was right, even in the face of subtle opposition or rivalry. In this quiet triumph, Marissa found not only resolution but a profound sense of personal growth and fulfillment.